Hello and welcome, I'm Mark. If you're coming back for a second or third time, thank you very much. And if you're new, nice to see you. The weather outside right now is appallingly bad. There are brief moments of wondrous sunshine, followed by unbelievable amounts of rain. It's been raining non-stop for 2 or 3 days. Perfect weather to talk about the Tempest. This is the complete works of William Shakespeare. Well thumbed. It is a find that I came across in a thrift shop in my local town. And I've been reading and making various notes, as you can see. It was said to be Shakespeare's last play. Let's put aside for now the argument of whether Shakespeare actually existed. Mark Rylance and Sir Derek Jacobi, would have much to say about that. And funnily enough, they're mirroring what was written in the 19th century about did Shakespeare or Shakespeare really exist? Or was it a pen name, a pseudonym for somebody else who wanted to say certain things on the stage, but because of the time and place couldn't criticise royalty, therefore did it indirectly through plays set in other kingdoms, or in this case, a dukedom. Well, it's actually an island. And get myself into parentheses here. I'll backtrack and start again. There's more to the play than you would think. It's like Shakespeare waving goodbye, which is really, for scholars, talked about at the epilogue, right at the end, in which Prospero, who has been the antagonist, protagonist, at the end, when all the players have gone off the stage, speaks directly to the audience and begs for their, well, he says here, with the help of your good hands, in other words, clapping, let your indulgence set me free. And he's talking about everything, all the project was really to please. So some bitter sadness there, bittersweet sadness, that the bard, after many years and successes, is coming to an end. And of course, hundreds of years have gone by. So why is the Tempest of interest to anybody? For myself, my interest in the Tempest goes back a long way. When I was at school, secondary school, this would have been the late 1970s, the drama department put on it wasn't the Tempest, it was little scenes from various Shakespearean plays, in which I played Trinculo, where a mate of mine, schoolmate, played Caliban. And Caliban is this often seen as demonic looking or human come sea animal. And we decided to bunk off school one day, get a load of mud to put all over him. And it looked very good. And we had the scene where the drunken butler, is it not Sebastian? What is his name? I'll have to look up it here. Yeah, Stefano. The drunken butler comes along and can't work out whether it's a man or a fish. Caliban is hiding under well, it depends on the play, but we used a big blanket. And then there's this almost comedic to and fro between Stefano, and this is the problem with Shakespeare. Some of the names are so similar. Stefano, the drunken butler, and Trinculo, who I played. And I don't remember actually performing it apart from the fact that I had these trousers on, and part of the act was Stefano falls down, tries to grab something while he's falling. My pants come down to reveal some underpants underneath with a Mickey Mouse thing on the crotch. You had to be there. It was hilarious at the time. I read The Tempest. I saw it at school. Generally, apart from getting involved in the drama department, it was over my head. Far too many these and thous and some of the words I didn't really grasp. And it has taken nearly all my life to really get into understanding anything about the rhythm, the meter, the pauses in the word. Where do you put the pause to give effect? So, for instance, just as an aside, which is a Shakespearean thing, Hamlet, it's to be or not to be. That is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, and so on. So that to be or not to be, that is the question. Where's the pause? Is it to be or not to be? That is the question. Or is it to be or not to be? That is the question. And so on. I didn't get any of that when I was younger, and I'm only really just starting to get it now. But I've gone through The Tempest, and obviously it starts with that famous scene of the storm, which is actually it's done very well, actually. I mean, some of the words like yarly, yarly, what do they mean? And of course, this is the thing about Shakespeare. If you're really going to do justice to Shakespeare, you have to understand some of the words which are no longer in current use. And if you don't understand them, they can be quite jarring. But there's some wonderful wit that's hidden in the actual words. And if I have any issue with Shakespeare, it's not the plays themselves, it's often when they make them into films or the stage play. And it's to do with the expectancy of the modern audience. So how do I explain this? I saw Ian McKellen in King Lear here in Auckland. It was that wonderful time when he famously stripped naked. And he's well endowed as an older gentleman. And I remember when everyone knew in the theatre it was going to happen. He was going to get his tackle out. And when it happened, everyone was shocked. And I remember this woman, 2 or 3 seats away from me, went, "Oh my God." Well, that's King Lear. But anyway, what was my point? Yes, it's the pace. King Lear is a long play. Even if you go through some of the lines, and in movies, often they'll drop out whole sections of the play because modern audiences now don't want to sit watching something for more than a couple of hours. Which is why you never get movies now like Once Upon a Time in the West by Sergio Leone, 4 or 5 hours long, potentially. I think he did Once Upon a Time in America as a 7-hour film, which had to be cut down to 3.5. So the audience taste has changed. They're not prepared to last that long. But the temptation then is to speed up the delivery of some of the words and the characters speaking. And it's bang, 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 bang. And often I've found it difficult to follow or get the sense of importance of what's being said. When you're reading Tempest, you can go as slow and as quick as you want. But the opening scene, for instance, is an example where in some of the stage plays, and I've seen recently one with the late Christopher Plummer. It was a Canadian production. And there was a lot of noise. Now, whether it's because the microphones picked it up for the film production, which was very well done. You saw everything, got to see all their facial features. Whether the audience got that, I'm not sure. There would have been a lot of noise and then people talking, and it would just have been people potentially going around making noise at the audience. And it could lose its effect. But when you read it, you can blot out all the noise and all the lights, which is very theatrical. My point being, if you was to slow down the play of The Tempest, it could be 4 or 5 hours long. No one's going to put up with that. And I find that a shame. And if what I've just said makes no sense, I'm thinking in my head, no, it doesn't make sense to me either, so join the club. But here we go. Great wit in this book, in the play. Gonzalo is an old fella who has quite a long presence at certain points in the play. He's on the ship and he's considering the boatswain. And the boatswain, the boatswain, had quite a presence on his ship. He was in charge of most of the rigging and the ship and blah, blah, blah. He was the one who go around with a knotted rope hitting the sailors if they weren't doing their job properly. The master conned the ship, effectively did the charts, did the navigation, where historically the captain was the one in charge of the fighting and the running of the ship. To be a master and a commander meant that you did both roles of captain and master. But on the big ships, certainly at this period, they're starting to separate as becoming unique entities, which is mirrored here. You get the bosun, you get the master. But the bosun's talking about, look, they're in the storm, all these people are coming up from below, get away because you're effectively assisting the storm. And then Gonzalo says, I have great comfort from this fellow. Methinks he have no drowning mark upon him. His complexion is perfect gallows. That is sarcasm of the deepest, highest order. But you could miss that when it's portrayed on the stage. So The Tempest is a fairly simple story. And again, in a way, you got to think of the period in which it's written. And I'm just going to check online so I get the dates right. Hold on. Shakespeare. When was he said to have died exactly? 1616. So King James, the first Stuart king, came to the throne after Elizabeth, and this was probably written round about 10 years in. But there was a lot of uncertainty in the three kingdoms of England, Scotland, and Ireland. And James had united, in a way, Scotland and England. He was James the Sixth of Scotland, but James the First of England. They would not join as a great kingdom, the kingdom of Great Britain, till 1707 under Anne. But there's a lot of political uncertainty. So Shakespeare, whoever, is writing The Tempest, but not setting it in any recognisable British place. He's saying, oh, this is the King of Naples over there, foreign. And this is the Duke of Milan, foreign. But they're all trying to usurp each other, and the play becomes almost bifurcated in two, actually three or four, where Prospero is trying to get his dukedom back, but at the same time, the usurping Duke of Milan is trying to knock off the King of Naples for various reasons, and there's these plots within plots, wheels within wheels, and then there's this love affair, and then there's Prospero, who is almost directing everything and controlling sprites like Ariel, and Greek goddesses appear at one point, Juno, and then this earth elemental Caliban. So it's a pastiche, it's a comedy, it's a fantasy, it's a love story, and it's about political revenge. But of course, set where nobody in power in England could complain. Although there is one mention of where this happens, and this is really, we have to give some leeway here. At the time this was written, where I'm living right now in New Zealand was totally unknown to anybody in Europe. The Maori were already here. They'd done a great migration, probably the most significant migration over the whole Pacific in history. And they didn't have any navigational aids apart from rudimentary. They put sticks, and the way they put them represented the stars above them, and so on. They were such great navigators over great distances, far better than anyone in Europe. But no one in Europe knew much about the world apart from Europe and just beyond. Most of the places in Africa had not been discovered to the west. Same with Asia, same out here in the Pacific. So there's this mixing of where exactly were places. So we've got the Duke of Milan, who's on an island with his daughter Miranda. He's been placed there, and Gonzalo, who had been in one of his court, had kindly let him have books, and one's a magical book and a staff, to make sure that he can possibly survive on the island. when he was usurped and cast away. But where is this island? Because supposedly the ship that is wrecked by the power of Prospero is halfway between Naples and Tunis, because they delivered a woman off there to marry the king of Tunis. But they also mention the Bermuths, which is Bermuda, which is way in the western part of the Atlantic. So there's this confusion as to where things are, and of course no one in the audience would have known, and most people, explorers, wouldn't have known. There's a great scene in Blackadder, the second series, where Blackadder has to go off. He's out of favour with the Queen, and he has to go off in a boat ship. And Melchett, who is one of the advisors, played by Stephen Fry, said, "We'd be very grateful if you could." And he gets like a no. What he said, we have here the finest cartographers have got this map, and it's just a blank piece of paper, and said they'd be very grateful if you could fill it in as he's going off. No one knew where things half were off the time, and longitude would be a problem perennially for years. So there's this dreamlike quality to it because it's uncertain as to where things are. So we're introduced to Prospero, who has been shipwrecked deliberately, placed on there, out the way, and he's allowed to keep his daughter Miranda. And Miranda grows up to be a young woman, only ever seeing the male aspect through her father, Prospero, who comes across as quite stern and remote, and Caliban, who's a male elemental. But to get us there's a use of language that's just, I find, wonderful. And I've just made a note. I've just opened up randomly this, and the yellow highlights are just some language that jumps out at me. So Miranda is listening, being forced to listen to the account given to her by her father for the first time, how they managed to be there, who he really is. He's the Duke of Milan, the rightful Duke of Milan. And he says, dost thou hear? Are you paying attention? He said, yes. Your tale, sir, would cure deafness. Great. Good wombs have borne bad sons. That's another famous quote that... A lot of the stuff here have been extracted from the play and exist elsewhere so that it's become well known, but not necessarily would somebody know it's come from the Tempest. The best one, of course, the most famous one, is Brave New World. And it's Aldous Huxley who did the book. And as I'm talking, I'm looking down because I'm trying to find where it is. I've highlighted it. It's actually in Act 5. And it's Miranda saying, "Oh wonder, how many goodly creatures are there here? How beauteous mankind is. Oh brave new world that has such people in it." Again, a quote that Aldous Huxley lifted direct from the play to make his own novel, Brave New World. So there's some wonderful literature, and the flow is typical of Shakespeare, really. And there's definitely the breaking of the fourth wall, as in a lot of plays by Shakespeare. And it's to do with the three people I've talked about, the drunken butler. And he comes across Caliban, and he doesn't know what Caliban is. But there's a storm, and he has to hide. And he's got these quotes I've just lifted, I'm going to lift out. He says, he's looking at the storm coming towards him, and he says, "Oh, yon same black cloud, yond huge one, looks like a foul bombard that would shed his liquor." And then he sees this strange creature, and he's obviously now going to turn to the audience, because he says the following: "Were I in England now, as once I was, and had but this fish painted, not a holiday fool there but would give a piece of silver. There would this monster make a man. Any strange beast there makes a man. When they will not give a doit to relieve a lame beggar, they will lay out 10 to see a dead Indian." So how do you interpret that? It's a criticism of English culture, isn't it? That you got people who will refuse to help someone dying in the street, but they'll spend a fortune just to see something exotic. Well, that obviously then is Shakespeare ribbing the people in the audience, but only the low sorts. He couldn't do that to the upper sorts, who would have enough power to shut him down, send him off to the tower, perhaps. There are some other quotes that I think's worth mentioning. And again, as soon as I read them, I just jotted something or jolted something in my mind to think, oh yeah, I've heard that somewhere before. It may just be from the play, but it struck a chord. You rub the sore when you should bring the plaster. This is some, badinage, wordplay. I wish mine eyes would with themselves shut up my thoughts. With eyes wide open, standing, speaking, moving, and yet so fast asleep. I don't know why I kept thinking of Eyes Wide Shut. So there's a scene in Act 4 where we see Iris and Juno come in. And it's to do with the fact that Prospero has this magic book and he's using his staff to keep enthralled a spirit called Ariel and an earth elemental called Caliban. And when you read it, you know that they're slaves and they must do as their master's bidding. But towards the end, his character changes from being stern and overpowering to, as soon as he's getting what he wants, he softens somewhat, and especially towards that epilogue at the end. He says, our rebels are now ended. And this is, I think, for me, underlies what this is all about, The Tempest. He says, we are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. That's typical Shakespeare. He's very melancholy about life, and he talks about the 7 ages, don't he, and in one play, and there's a lot of about our frailty, and everything's a dream, and we shuffle off this mortal coil. So The Tempest has this dreamlike quality because it references itself as all this is just a revel. All this is just make-believe and illusion. These are not natural events. They strengthen from strange to stranger. That's Alonso. I'm trying to find one final quote. Oh, yeah. And again, I've used this before in my introduction to YouTube. Whereof, what's past is prologue. What to come is yours and my discharge. So again, an ethical aspect there. What's gone in the past is prologue. Just focus now on the future, and it's down to us. The Tempest is an interesting thing for one particular reason for myself. When I lived in the UK for 40 odd years, I never realised until I moved to New Zealand how much of a box of Britishness I stood in. I was conscious, being in the Navy, that when you go abroad, you're seeing people with different cultures and different lifestyles, and then when you get back to Britain, you're back in the Britishness of things, your outlook, your attitude. And of course, Britain had a huge empire. When I came to live in New Zealand, very quickly was I confronted with the facts of how much Britishness I carried with me. And I thought I was a citizen of the world. And I was aware, being interested in history, that there was this difference how people looked now towards the British Empire and the post-Empire and the Commonwealth to when it was in full flow. And there potentially was a lot of arrogance from the British. The sun never set on the British Empire, and you had these huge maps of the world, and it was mainly coloured in red or pink, depending on where the British had settled and colonised and so on. And it was all done to impress people growing up and children and people who worked in government positions. But I came to New Zealand and I realised that it had, obviously New Zealand is a British Commonwealth nation. It was a colony of old. It had been settled primarily by the British. There were some French on the South Island. And the Dutch were the first to get here by Abel Janszoon Tasman. He, on a chart, put down New Zealand, which is New Zealand. And I was involved for a number of years with the university in the ethics department. And I remember a conversation with a Maori professor who talked about the deep grudge still held by modern Maori to the British colonial rule, which had gone over my head. Obviously, there's reasons for that. But being new to the country and now citizen, I have to confront the fact that how the British see New Zealand is not the same as the indigenous Maori, necessarily. Aotearoa, it is for the Maori. The land of the long white cloud. Why am I talking about this? Because a lot of people see the Tempest as a post-colonial statement that Prospero is enslaving people who live on an island that's not his own. Caliban, Ariel, have to do the bidding of the masters, the master in charge. And many people see parallels in that in the colonialism of Western nations over smaller countries. Bermuda is mentioned specifically, which obviously, the old Summer Isles, as it was called, is now a British Crown colony. And we have to understand that when I read The Tempest, with my cultural background, I'll be picking up on things that somebody from another cultural background, who may have had overlords from a foreign power, would look at this differently. They'll read into the themes far differently than I would. And that, I think, is the main benefit of The Tempest. Not that you necessarily have to think that is the case, you may disagree, but it will raise that issue if you're aware of modern conversations regarding The Tempest. So The Tempest, it's full of good humour. A lot of humour is dated. It's a place about how should we control the world? How should we treat nature? How should we treat each other? And ultimately, is it all an illusion? And that's just on a reading of it again. If I was to read that 5 years from now, I may pick up on things I've not picked up today. So it's a classic for a reason, as I said before in other episodes. And I'm glad that I've revisited it. The question is, which one's next? And the reason I say that is because in here, the next one is The Two Gentlemen Verona, which I have tried to get into before. So, I don't know. Two Gentlemen of Verona. I'll work on that one. Why not? It's next. Just me talking to myself. It's the only way I get decent conversation. But anyway, if you've got this far, well done. And thank you very much. That's my take on The Tempest. Bye-bye.